We have a very interesting session coming up. It's definitely one that I've been looking forward to and thinking about quite a bit. We are in the face-to-face industry. I've been in it for a long time because I really obviously thrive on the accountability. We are the original authentic business. You can't have a soft launch. You can't spin something. When you put on an event, it either works or it doesn't, and there's no place to hide. So when I heard our next speaker, Dina Cappiello, talking about fake news, talking about global communication, talking about storytelling, talking about how all of this really is becoming more important now, I said, I want her to come to ECF. I want her to tell her story at ECF about how events are possibly becoming even more important than they ever were. So before I step on any more of her talk so far, I'd like to bring Dina up to the stage. Her bio, again, is in the second screen, and please feel free to ask questions in the second screen throughout. So tell us about fake news and how we fit in this new world, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can everybody hear me? I was a former teacher, so I project and speak very loudly. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. As a former journalist who spent 15 years in the journalism field, right now reminds me of what I don't miss anymore, which is Bob Mueller speaking live before every camera in this town on the Russia probe. It's live now, so ironic that I'm here speaking to you all. So today we're going to talk about storytelling. I've been a professional storyteller my whole career, nearly 20 years. Again, I started in journalism, spent 15 years as a journalist, half of that time as the national environmental and energy writer for the AP here in Washington. And then about 4 years ago, I transitioned over to the PR world with Edelman. And you might want to know what this title of mine, which I made up, means. And that means I'm a storyteller now for brands. We mine stories. I have a team of about 15 people in DC. We also have former journalists throughout the Edelman network who have backgrounds in storytelling, and we work with clients to tell stories in the earned space, in the owned space, on their websites. A lot of companies are launching newsrooms, and through social and digital. But the reason for this headline, yes, it's catchy. I wrote headlines for the AP for many years, is that storytelling is really harder than ever. And we're going to kind of walk through why that is and why all that you do, exhibitions and exhibits, can really offer a haven for trust and be a great spot for 360-degree storytelling. So I have 3 questions to kind of pose to you to see where you guys place in terms of media consumption and media habits. So let's go to the first question, which is, which of these outlets do you view as the most trustworthy? Please log your answers on your tablets. So yesterday, when I was doing this question with a much smaller sample size, it was a very different result. But this is not at all surprising. The top tier publications like the Wall Street Journal, like the New York Times, are actually doing great now, even in an era of mistrust for the media, largely because of the Trump bump. And so I think it's going to be interesting what happens in 2020 and if that sustains. AP, I'm not going to take it personally, but out of all of those publications listed, AP was actually rated the most neutral. The New York Times is a little bit to the left. You read its editorial pages, the Wall Street Journal a little bit to the right. So the second question, What concerns you most about the media today? So just please take a moment and log in that answer.
Just light it up, burn it up, hotter than hot, hotter than hot. Take a sip from the cup, it don't quit till we melt the snow off the mountaintop.
Great. This is also what I was hoping would happen. So bias, obviously, that they're not reporting the facts straight. This goes right to the issue of trust, which we're going to talk about in a minute, using some of the trust results from Edelman's trust barometer, and accuracy is very tied to that. The third, though, I'm going to point out, and we'll talk about this, and we'll see a slide on this in a minute, is that it's also connected. As somebody who was in the business for as long as I was, it's not really intended to be biased. You're doing more with less. As the media shrinks, more and more reporters are strapped, they're rushing, and then accuracy suffers, right? Okay, the last question. Where do you engage with the news? In print? That's the thing that used to be delivered to your doorstep. I hope some of you still do that. Online, apps, social media, websites. I know Twitter is my primary jam. TV or radio and podcasts. Please log your answers.
Burn like paper tigers, but it's your friendly fire music, shining bright through and lucid. That's why we got to introduce it to the world and distribute it for free. You're free to boost it, turn up the sound.
Okay, is anyone in this room surprised by this result? I'm sure as I'm speaking, some of you will be scrolling on your smartphones, getting the latest headlines. It's all coming through digital. We have this great debate within Edelman. We used to have a separate digital department, and we're kind of like, why? Everything is digital. Although I lead an editorial and media strategies team of former journalists and media experts, we are pitching for the digital space. And more reporters are measuring their performance, and their editors are measuring their performance on shareability. And so being able to share is really critical when you're talking about storytelling. Great. Well, thank you for participating in those questions. I really appreciate it. So as I kind of previewed, trust is a big issue right now in every arena, but particularly when you talk about media and storytelling. So Edelman has been doing a trust barometer for well over a decade of global companies and institutions. When I first came to Edelman, to be honest, I was like, this is kind of BS. As a journalist, I was kind of like, wait a minute, does this really tell you anything? It actually does. And over the years, I've actually really dug into the data and gotten absorbed about some of the results and some of the insights it's gleaned. So obviously, this is probably no surprise, only 40% of the US population trusts in government, but when it comes to media, it's still only 48%. That's actually an uptick from last year when Sam saw me talk, because we saw a real huge diminish in media trust right after the election. But there is a highlight to this, and I love this slide because this is who we're hoping to reach. Actually, despite that overwhelming distrust in media, people are consuming it more and more. And they're not just consuming it. 27% of people are amplifiers. That means they're actually consuming it, and they're sharing it, they're liking it, they're commenting on it. I definitely fall into that category. I'm a media junkie still, hence why I was on the Mueller bandwagon when I was getting over here. And then 33% are daily consumers. And this actually, for you all, is an opportunity for your exhibitions, for your exhibits, that people do want stories, they do want news, and then you still have 39% disengaged, but compared to last year, that's a huge improvement. So what are people looking for in terms of to sort all of this out? They want reliable sources. 70% still worry that there's false information out there being used as a weapon, right? I think the latest example of that, and there's probably one every day, is the Nancy Pelosi video that was altered, that was slowed down to make her appear drunk and slurring, that went viral. Facebook then decided not to pull it down. That was a huge controversy. So, and people, consumers and the audience is smart, right? And they know there's political motivations around it, but they sort of just can't get their eyeballs off of it. Even I looked at it after I saw it on Twitter and on Facebook. So when it comes to who you trust and who you look to take the lead, CEOs are right there. And it's kind of an interesting result. So people want CEOs to take the lead on things and take a stance. We're seeing this more and more, right? You can see this with Patagonia CEO recently, right? Took the tax refund given by the government and donated to all open space and conservation causes. Very, very on brand. You saw it in the Nike ads with Kaepernick and kneeling, right? That ad was really interesting because I think it was an ad that was just so to the audience. Yes, some people were very upset about it and were burning Nike gear, but Nike sales went through the roof because they are actually speaking to a certain consumer of Nike with that story. So they're looking for CEOs to take a stand. And they're also looking for leadership from employers. So I thought this was a very interesting result. More and more people trust their employers. They think it's critically important for the CEO to respond to things in challenging times and to help them sort out this fake news world, right? And where is the path? What should they believe? What should they not believe? What do we stand for as a company, as a brand? And then 80% of employees trust their employer more than any other relationship. And then 58% look to their employer as a trustworthy source of information. So you take all of that, right? Who people believe, who people trust, who people are looking for to give them a path forward, to a reason to believe, and then you put that on top of what's happening in the media. A lot of you in this room are great storytellers, seen your websites, already doing great storytelling with your exhibits, so it should be no surprise to you that the media landscape is completely and utterly changing, almost every single day. I tell my team I left the AP 4 years ago. I don't know a single soul in the AP Washington Bureau. I don't know anybody in the White House Bureau, because that's the turnover in journalism, and because they're going on and doing different things that aren't traditional journalism. But this is what we would call, this is kind of a big diagram of how the media landscape works. And for you, basically what it means is this. Nobody is going to see your story or content unless it hits this outer rung. It has to get on social. Search, more than ever, is being trusted. We're going to get to that in a minute. Search is right up there with the traditional media, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal that you all turn to, and then the curators. And then in this middle, I look like this is a solar system kind of diagram, are the content creators. This is also an opportunity for all of you in this room. It's not just media, it's influencers, it's brands. I look at what you do as somebody who spent 20 years covering exhibitions and exhibits as a reporter, organizing them as a head of a journalism organization, and now going to them for numerous clients to do media and storytelling on the ground, where we do full-fledged newsrooms and cover events like reporters for brands. That gives you an opportunity. You can create the content, it just has to get out to this outer rung. And then one of the reasons why consumers are looking to their employers or CEOs for some kind of sign is this: we are bombarded by content of all shapes and sizes, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram, LinkedIn. Now we have teams, internally. We have so many sources of information that we can't sort it out. So how do you all break through? Journalism is getting tougher. It's getting tougher to pitch reporters. Why? Because there are fewer of them. And the ones that are left are all watching Bob Bowler right now. They're not going to want to get the pitch from you, the press release from you. That's not really that newsworthy, right? You know, I was just in New Orleans recently. I go to Jazz Fest every year. I'm a big live music fan, and I was there the day that Times-Picayune announced their whole staff was laid off. They don't exist anymore. 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner at 65 years old, laid off, looking for a job. This is the reality. They're not being repurposed. What's happening is you're hiring younger people who really don't have that training and that discipline and that experience as a beat reporter covering the press. So it's very hard to pitch these days, which is why our POV, the POV by staff, is you have to craft the story for them. You have to frame the story for them. Just like the AP was the first draft of journalism and is still the first draft of journalism, brands have that ability to seed that story, to frame that story, to deliver the angle on a silver platter for journalists and for their audience. And here's why. Because of this. A story can be seeded and travel anywhere. I love this one. It's an old example, but it's like an oldie but goodie, where a guy got dumped by his girlfriend. He had an around-the-world trip that he was planning, so he went onto Reddit and was like, does anybody have the same name as my ex-girlfriend so I could go on this trip with her? So we all comb Reddit, okay? Journalists live on social media. We live on Twitter. We live on Reddit. We live on Instagram stories, and it was spotted. Most newsrooms have social media editors. That's all they're doing, is going through these social networks. And somebody spotted it, and then it gets into the NP, which is the big newspaper in Canada. And then broadcast sees it in the mainstream media, and it goes to broadcast. And then it gets tweeted, right, by influencers and by CNN Travel, right, a niche site focusing on travel. And we'll get to niche in a minute. This works to your advantage. Because if you, it could be in Twitter, it could be in LinkedIn. We've had things go from LinkedIn to Bloomberg to the New York Times, almost verbatim. If you place it here, it will go around. And the beauty of that is this. There's nothing that a journalist wants more than to think they discovered it. The key is that you've engineered it. But it has to be quality, authentic, compelling content shaped like a journalist would shape it. Yeah.
Did he get a date? What's the end?
Yes, he actually did. Thank you. That's always the question, right? Thanks, Sam. So social media not only dominates as a source, and I love this data behind me. 53% of US journalists, this is a survey by Zeno Group and Muck Rack, do not write off press releases or pitches anymore. They are going into their little trash can. Every single one. Where are they getting sources for stories? They're getting them on Twitter, rising. Twitter is the platform for journalists and for influencers. They're getting them on LinkedIn, increasingly. And they're getting them on Instagram and YouTube, very visual platforms. You'll see one thing that I want to point out here, which is Facebook. What's going on with Facebook? Anybody have an idea? The algorithm. The algorithms have made the news feed less valuable. They are not publishing publishers as often. They're publishing people in your peer group more often and sharing that. So it's become less valuable for journalism organizations and journalists. So this is critical. And this is why when we craft stories, we're thinking them not just directly to the reporter, but crafting them in a way that they get onto a social channel that a reporter will see and will be inspired to cover that story and write about it in the way that we hope that they write about it. But it's also a channel. I talked about shareability, right? So more and more media companies are creating new platforms. And what's interesting about this, going back to that Facebook stat, is Facebook used to be the major social networks, used to be how journalists got out, right? It wasn't the New York Times controlling what you see, it was Facebook. That is changing. More and more media outlets are going direct to their audience. They're building loyal audiences. You know, now you can go and hear a talk by a New York Times reporter in Manhattan. You can go on a cruise with Diane Rehm. They are creating this relationship and they want a loyal following. And you're seeing that more and more through social. You're also seeing an uptick in niche media, and this is an opportunity for you all too, because you convene these exhibitions, these exhibits of people that are all experts in this field or in this thing, and that is going deep. And we're seeing more and more outlets going deep with a very specific audience in mind. It's almost, as our media ecologist says on the slide, like the craft beers of media. This is an opportunity for you to craft your own niche publications online, stemming from your exhibitions and your exhibits. So how do you do this? What are people looking for? Well, they look for all of these things. I'm going to point out one, which is timeliness. We're looking for personal impact, change, proximity, surprise. Surprise is the one that's like, that's the water cooler one. Did you read that? It's stranger than fiction, right? Tension, prominence, timeliness. So I want to focus on timeliness for you for a minute, because I know that you all plan well in advance for your exhibitions and exhibits. And one of the first things you should do is start thinking of stories from the outset. We've helped many clients plan for exhibitions and exhibits, and we actually take a very storytelling approach from the outset, because who's there, what they're going to say is going to create the story. But I would encourage you for that timely factor is, as you're planning, to actually monitor the trends and the conversation, so you can actually make slight tweaks that make what's happened that day more and more relevant. That monitoring for us is key for storytelling, because it has to be relevant in the now. It's not said today, it's what's trending in the media landscape right now. I talked a little bit about this. Search is key. Search is also an opening for you. It's just as trusted as traditional media right now, which is key. And to do that, you have to be able to tell these compelling, authentic stories that use those traits. And so, lastly, what does it mean for all of you? Approach your events with the story you want to tell top of mind. If you're engineering the story, the event has to be engineered to get that story, right? It has to be engineered to deliver that narrative. And then have a plan to tell it across all channels available to you. Everything should ladder up to a North Star. I do a lot of these things for clients, and I'm sure that any of them are in the room right now, but there seems to be a haphazard strategy sometime with the social. It should all be very strategic and very organized in terms of what you want people to come away thinking and feeling from that event, from that engagement. Whether it's the event or whether it's the content they are engaging with, they should be the same. They should have the same feeling coming away from it. That's what we would call the North Star, what you want people to come away thinking and feeling about it. And then we talk about the foil and the ideal, but here I'm going to break it down more simply for you, right? Stories are about problems. That's why everybody thinks the media always writes about negative things. We like to write about negative things, right? So the best way to kind of position yourself is as a solution to those problems. Again, going back to that monitoring, because that monitoring is key as to what's trending, what's the focus now, right? If you're in the healthcare space, there's a lot about measles and vaccinations, right? Like those kind of big trends to figure out how can I bring these people, these experts to bear at my exhibition on that topic and have a POV that will be newsworthy, that will get that narrative and that story out there. Content should always be story-driven. That means show, don't tell. We live in the land of messages as PR professionals. I consider myself one now. Journalists live in the area of show. It's a flip. You need to illustrate your message. You should be character-driven. We're going to get to that in a minute. Social, of course, but also thinking of the journalist as one in that audience who can be inspired by that social content. Visual and timely. Events should also activate employees' voices. When you ask who's most credible, it's the company technical expert, a person like yourself, an academic expert, the regular employee, financial industry analysts, and then you see CEOs and government way down there, right? Because people want People want to read about people like themselves, engage with content about people like themselves. They trust that. And so employees should definitely be leveraged, and they're always key in all storytelling efforts that we do. Again, these spokespeople can actually advance brand advocacy. So a regular person, a journalist, company employee, and then you see below, and it's so interesting. It's like whenever we have clients come in and say, I don't want to be on the front page of the New York Times. Yeah, I know. But it's probably better for you to be in one of these niche publications. I feel the same thing happens with clients sometimes in creative executions. We need the celebrity. Who's the celebrity? But our research shows that it's actually the regular guy or the regular woman that is actually better to put out front than the celebrity or the model or the figurehead. Okay, that is all I have. I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to take questions.
I think it was very helpful.
Yeah.
So even though my main question was about the Canadian dude, and you answered that one, I have a two-part question. Number one is, we talk about day-to-day monitoring the feeds, minor changes in your messaging. Most of us are dealing with annual events that have at least a 12-month planning cycle. How do we start 12 months in advance to figure out what's going to be happening 12 months hence?
No, I mean, 12 months is a really long lead time. So I would think of it like this. I mean, when you're well in advance, listen, you guys are the experts. I would look at the major trends, right? What are the biggest stories out there in your industry that really aren't going to change? So when you talk about trends, you talk about these major things that literally there's just little developments, right, over the course of the year. That's what I'm talking about. So you can isolate them well in advance and continue to monitor them. And although you can't, blow up your agenda, you can make little tweaks like a snappy headline, right? Maybe add a last-minute speaker that may really make it a moment to have somebody come and see or to have journalists hear from. So I think that the trends are somewhat static based on the industry, but over the course of the year, you want to monitor those incremental developments, right? It's like, what is your master narrative in that industry? What are those pillars, those topics that are really critical, and then monitor them in real time.
Okay, thank you. We have another question over here.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
It's really important and engaging. Many of us are focused strictly on business verticals, and a lot of what you were presenting was applicable, it seemed, to the general public, especially in terms of what's influenced and things like that. And I wonder if you see a difference between those two audiences in terms of marketing and selling an event.
So that's a really good question, and it's something that we wrestle with at Edelman, especially when we're talking about clients in the B2B space, right? Our POV is, although you may be going B2B, right, or in the business verticals, to think of the ultimate consumer, right? And I would say in the niche publications, think about that, right? Think about getting into those publications, those deep publications that audience reads. But when we're changing our thoughts on the B2B, because we thought of it as it is a separate audience, but what we're seeing that change being driven from the ground up, right? So the consumers are really critical as well. So you might want to target the business executive, but you also want to try to talk about who that business executive is serving. If that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. We have a question from the second screen.
Sure. So it says, are there specific ways to get attention? Like, is humor resonating right now, or having an emotional appeal, et cetera?
I think that is completely and utterly dependent on your audience, right? And so I think that maybe one thing that I could have emphasized more in this, if it didn't come across clear, is all of this is about audience. So when you're crafting that story, to your question, it's that so what, who cares for your audience, right? And then we get into issues about tone. We go back, let me give you an example of this. We actually work for SeaWorld Parks, and we basically have two separate work streams, one reputation and one about promoting parks events. Very different tones, right? Because right now the brand wants to be known for what they're doing in marine research and marine ecology and ocean science. So we're not going to go out with a tone with a bunch of emojis and cuteness and anthropomorphizing animals when the brand is under attack for animals in captivity, etc. But when it's a free beer day at the park or it's about a roller coaster, I think there's a little bit more leeway to be a little bit more fun. So I think it's really dependent on your audience and what you're trying to achieve. I don't think there's easy tricks. I think the tone has to match the content, and that together has to ladder up to the goal.
I have one more, and it will be the last question. Your title is chief storyteller.
Basically.
Basically.
Well, my president calls me story
Oh,
sparker.
my wife's waving at me. I'm sorry. Well, that trumps my question. Thank you, Gary. Thank you.
It's not a question, just want to point your audience to research available that really lines up with Edelman's data on trust. The Attendee ROI Playbook Report Series, Part 2, indicates that trade shows are top ranked for value and online resources are only ranked 4th. So just gain access. You can download all of these reports for free. But I love the Edelman research. But
Yeah, it's actually fun, and it's actually I use it quite a bit, and I think it's really valuable. Thanks for that comment, because I think that what you guys do can be a haven for trust and a center for people to go. All those people that we talked about that are believed and trusted are at your events typically. So leverage them to tell your stories.
Okay, I loved her talk. It was all that I thought it would be. It really is nice to, nice is not, it's imperative that we understand that we can be a haven, that what we are is a haven in a fake news world. I really, really like that. So thank you very much.